Session 9: Streetism and Delinquency. Introduction. In this study session, you will examine streetism and delinquency. The study session also examines the factors responsible for these phenomena. When you have studied this session, you should be able to explain various childhood conditions such as streetism, delinquency, and child trafficking. 2. Discuss childhood development trauma. Streetism. Part of the childhood result of trauma is streetism. Streetism is a syndrome that involves minors found in the streets on unwholesome times. Streetism is an English word implying the living of homeless or unmonitored children on the streets, especially when related to drugs, disease, crime, or delinquency. This term appears to be specific to Anglophone Africa. There are two types of street children as classified by Ebigbo, 1997. These are off the street type and on the street type. The on the street type are the children found in the street during the daytime but would go back to their homes later at night. They are usually from low-income families and are rarely enrolled in schools. Some go to school but engage in absenteeism quite often and may even drop out of school for low performance. The off-the-street type are the children who reside and subsist on the streets. They live, sleep, and virtually engage in all forms of activities for survival in the streets. The two groups of street children are at risk of joining deviant gangs and engage in crimes. They are likely to also embrace a deviant lifestyle, and a lot of research has been carried out on these children. Some researchers have also distinguished between the off-the-street type of children. For example, those who are thrown out and those who left on their own accord. The thrown out are the ones that the parents abandoned to the streets and need to be in the streets because there is nowhere to go, having been abandoned by their parents. The other category left the house because of deviant acts and fear of punishment. The two categories are definitely at risk of deviant lifestyles. Many of such children are prone to police arrests and labeled as delinquents when they are caught. Delinquency is defined by the law, and it implies any antisocial or criminogenic behavior committed by the minors against the law guiding minors. For many young people today, traditional patterns guiding the relationships and transitions between family, school, and work are being challenged. Social relations that ensure a smooth process of socialization are collapsing. Lifestyle trajectories are becoming more varied and less predictable. The restructuring of the labor market, the extension of the maturity gap, the period of dependence of young adults on the family, and, arguably, the more limited opportunities to become an independent adult are all changes influencing relationships when family and friends, educational opportunities and choice, labor market participation, leisure activities and lifestyle. It is not only developed countries that are facing this situation. In developing countries as well, there are new pressures on young people undergoing the transition from childhood to independence. Rapid population growth, the unavailability of housing and support services, poverty, unemployment and underemployment among youths, the decline in the authority of local communities, overcrowding in poor urban areas, the disintegration of the family, and ineffective educational systems are some of the pressures young people must deal with. Researchers worldwide have observed an increase in the rate of juvenile delinquency globally. The problem of juvenile delinquency is becoming more complicated and universal, and crime prevention programs are either unequipped to deal with the present realities or do not exist. Many developing countries have done little or nothing to deal with these problems, and international programs are obviously insufficient. Developed countries are engaged in activities aimed at juvenile crime prevention, but the overall effect of this program is rather weak because the mechanisms in place are often inadequate to address the existing situation. It is possible to develop effective prevention programs without understanding the reasons behind juvenile involvement in criminal activity. Different approaches are used in scientific and practical literatures on juvenile crime and violence to define and explain delinquent behavior by young people. To criminologists, juvenile delinquency encompasses all public wrongs committed by young people between the ages of 12 and 20. Criminologists view the concept more broadly, believing that it covers a multitude of different violations of legal and social norms, from minor offenses to serious crimes committed by juveniles. Included under the umbrella of juvenile delinquency are status offenses, so called because they are closely connected with the age status of an offender. A particular action or behavior is considered a violation of the law only if it is committed by a juvenile. Examples include truancy and running away. In an attempt to explain the theoretical underpinnings of delinquency, researchers have associated the specifics of youth behavior with the home, family, neighborhood, peers, and many other variables that together or separately influence the formation of young people's social environment. While delinquency is a common characteristic of the period and process of becoming an adult, it is very important to note that juveniles often create stable criminal groups with a corresponding subculture and start to engage in the activities of adult criminal groups, in effect choosing delinquent careers. It is thus important that such problems are early detected and appropriate intervention is used to stem it, or else improper managing of it could lead to adult criminality. Factors explaining juvenile delinquency. Many factors have been introduced to explain deviance among the minors. The intensity and severity of juvenile offenses are generally determined by the social, economic, and cultural conditions prevailing in a country. There is evidence of a universal increase in juvenile crime taking place concurrently with economic decline, especially in poor districts of large cities. In many cases, street children later become young offenders, having already encountered violence in their immediate social environment as either witnesses or victims of violent acts. The educational attainment of this group are rather low as a rule. Basic social experience acquired in the family is too often insufficient, and the socio-economic environment is determined by poverty and under or unemployment. The causes of and conditions for juvenile crimes are usually found at each level of the social structure, including society as a whole, social institutions, social groups and organizations, and interpersonal relations. Juveniles' choice of delinquent careers and the consequent perpetuations of delinquency are fostered by a wide range of factors, the most important of which are described below. Economic and social factors. Juvenile delinquency is driven by the negative consequences of social and economic development, in particular economic crisis, political instability, and the weakening of major institutions, including the state, systems of public education and public assistance, and the family. Socioeconomic instability is often linked to persistent unemployment and low income among the youths, which can increase the likelihood of their involvement in criminal activity. The description above fits perfectly to the current situation in Nigeria. This might explain why there is now high-level violence and criminality today. Cultural factors. Delinquent behaviors often occurs in social settings in which the norms for acceptable behavior have broken down. Under such circumstances, many of the common rules that deter people from committing socially unacceptable acts may lose their relevance for some members of the society. They respond to the traumatizing and destructive changes in the social reality by engaging in rebellious, deviant, or even criminal activities. An example of such a setting would be the modernization of traditional societies and the accompanying changes wrought by the application of new technologies. Shifts of this magnitude affect the types and organizations of labor activities, social characteristics, lifestyles, and living arrangements. And these changes in turn affect authority structures, forms of obedience, and modes of political participation, even going so far as to influence perceptions of reality. In both developed and developing countries, consumer standards created by the media are considerably beyond the capacity of most families to achieve. Nevertheless, these ideals become a virtual reality for many young people, some of whom will go to great lengths to maintain a lifestyle they cannot afford. Because not all population groups have access to the necessary resources, including education, professional training, satisfactory employment and income, health services, and adequate housing. There are those who are unable to achieve their goals by legal means. The contraindication between idealized and socially approved goals and the sometimes limited real-life opportunities to achieve them legally creates a sense of frustration in many young people. A criminal career becomes one form of addressing this contraindication. Therefore, one of the reasons for delinquent behavior is an excessive focus on proposed goals, achieving success, coupled with insufficient means to achieve them. The likelihood of deviant acts occurring in this context depends in many respects not only on the availability of legal opportunities but also on the level of access to illegal opportunities. Nigeria as a nation is virtually on the verge of this, and greater number of juveniles are continually engaging themselves in different forms of antisocial behavior that are criminogenic in nature. Urban migration. This is another significant factor explaining why there seems to be more juvenile delinquency in urban areas than rural areas or townships. It has been observed that the ongoing process of urbanization in developing countries is contributing to juvenile involvement in criminal behavior. The basic features of the urban environment foster the development of new forms of social behavior deriving mainly from the weakening of primary social relations and control, increasing reliance on the media at the expense of formal communication, and the tendency towards anonymity. These patterns are generated by the higher population density, degree of heterogeneity, and the number of people found in urban contexts. Family influence. Studies show that children who receive adequate parental supervision are less likely to engage in criminal activity. Dysfunctional family settings characterized by conflict, inadequate parental control, weak internal linkage and integration, and premature autonomy are closely associated with juvenile delinquency. Children in disadvantaged families that have few opportunities for legitimate employment and face a higher risk of social exclusion are overrepresented among offenders. The plight of ethnic minorities and migrants, including displaced persons and refugees in certain parts of the world, is especially distressing. The countries in transition are facing particular challenges in this respect, with the associated insecurity and turmoil contributing to an increase in the number of children and juveniles neglected by their parents and suffering abuse and violence at home. The family, as a social institution, is currently undergoing substantial changes. Its form is diversifying with, for example, the increase in one-parent families and non-matrimonial unions, the absence of fathers in many low-income families can lead boys to seek patterns of masculinity in delinquent groups of peers. These groups in many respects substitute for the family, define male roles, and contribute to the acquisition of such attributes as cruelty, strength, excitability, and anxiety. The importance of family well-being is becoming increasingly recognized. Success in school depends greatly on whether parents have the capacity to provide their children with starting opportunities, including the resources to buy books and manuals and pay for studies. Adolescents from low-income families often feel excluded. To raise their self-esteem and improve their status, they may choose to join a juvenile delinquent group. These groups provide equal opportunities to everyone, favorably distinguishing themselves from school and family, where positions of authority are occupied by adults. Study session summary. In this study session, you learned about childhood conditions such as streetism, delinquency, and child trafficking. He also examined childhood developmental trauma, how it is distinguished from post-traumatic disorders, earlier diagnosed by clinicians, and current status about treating such children. End of study session 9. Thanks for listening.